All right, so this week we actually had a lot of discussion last month, with Caroline Mouton on data retention and disposal from a data privacy point of view. Now, if any of you are in Saudi and you're doing the NDMO, you will also remember that data retention policies are predominantly sitting in data storage and operations. So there's a bit of a sort of crossover between these two. And that makes sense from a point of view of data and operations and storage. Have been trying to deal with this thing for some time. They've had to deal with it for some time. So that's almost where the real requirement sits. But there's also a scenario of if people want to be removed from the system, make sure that you don't have any form of record of them, then you'd need to be able to apply this data retention almost down at a data subject level, which makes things a little bit more complicated. All right, so moving on. What I'd like to do, and I've asked Paul to join us. So Paul and I and the team have been working extensively on building principles, policies, and procedures. Paul's the data governance specialist on the project, and typically it is the data governance's role to do this all. That doesn't mean they do it all on their own. A lot of times they'll do it in conjunction with specialists from the other domains and knowledge areas. So I'll do an intro and then I'll hand over to Paul, and he will show you the sort of work that we're doing and the frameworks that we're using and the way in which we build the policies and procedures. Okay, so hopefully, and we're happy to share some of that material. If you are interested, we can reach out to us and we can show you and give you some examples of that. I know there's been lots of people that have asked for sample data privacy policies and things like that. Okay, so let's get into it. Please interrupt or ask a question, put your hand up. Happy also if you just open the mic and ask questions. Okay, so let's go a little bit further back in terms of what do we mean by all this P3T? We use this term P3T, and I actually thought someone else had named it, and I did a search. Veronica asked me, where did you get this terminology from? And I said, I'm sure it was somewhere around, but I can't find anyone that's labeled it like that. So when we say P3T, we're talking principles, policies, procedures, and reference architecture or technology definitions. So here you can see this is data management functional areas. So for P3T, we have to do everything. Okay, there's not one piece that we can leave out. We basically need a definition of how the practice needs to operate across every single one of these domains, knowledge areas. Everything needs to be done. Paul, if I remember correctly, I think we've been doing it for the last 3 months. Is that correct?
Howard, started last week of June, getting ramped up, and then got moving. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. So this is sort of just almost a diagram of how we set out the goal to reach NDMO compliance P1. And these are the different areas that need all their principles and policies defined. So you can see the sort of journey that we're on. Who's responsible? Who needs to do all of this stuff? Now, this is our data governance recipe. And we see that practice establishment or domain establishment, depending on where you are, we see it as it's part of the data governance, and it's basically we have to define the essentials, the people, the principles, reference architecture. Once we've defined that, we have to operationalize this within the business. We have to get to a point where these processes are business as usual. Okay, because a level 3 defined means that standards have been set and they are being used across the business. A level 2 or a level what we call repeatable in the DMMA is, yes, there are some definitions of the processes, but they're not consistent across the organization. So this is the important part. Yes, we spend all the time defining it, but we've got to get it into BAU, which requires training, engagement, change management. And then we can move into assurance. Okay, so practice establishment is a pretty big area. A lot of you, and you have to go through all these things, and then once you've done it, you basically hand all of these policies over into a policy framework, and then it manages changes, it manages the life cycles, it manages relationships, and of course, there are times when you would enhance it for a specific policy, a specific regulatory policy. So you'd have a
Sorry, Howard. You put yourself on mute. Or maybe somebody put you on mute. It wasn't me.
Okay, so I'm not sure when I went on mute, but I think it was just that policy framework part where once you've got all these policies, they can't exist as Word documents on their own. They have to go into some form of data management system that will alert you as to when does a policy need to be refreshed, was there an event that happened, and then understanding the relationships between policies. Okay, so that you would have to, if one policy changed, then you may have changes in other policies. So it's a bit of a spider web of policy definitions across each other. We do know, I'm sure everyone knows, they've been through DMBOK training with Veronica, that there's no one knowledge area that exists without impact and input from other knowledge areas. It just doesn't stand on its own. All right, so the next section was how to build our P3T. Okay, and this is where I'd like to hand over to Paul and let him show you the structure that we've used, take through some PDP and for data storage, and then I'll take it back. Thanks, Paul. Over to you.
Cool, thanks, Howard. So I'm going to just jump across to my screen.
Okay, so there was a question there. What framework is required for updating of policies? Crystalline, I'll show you a database system that I've built. And for example, what we'll talk about is almost a vertical set of policies. So you would have, as an example, a corporate policy on governance that your data governance policy would have to link to. You may also have, for example, ISO 8000 that you have as a link to on a standard point of view. So if ISO 8000 gets a new version, you'd need to upgrade your versions. So you have all this spider web of interactions between policies to ensure that you get it right. Does that answer your question, Crystalline?
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'd actually like to see that later.
Okay, I'll show you a data model. If I can get it up, I'll actually show you what we put together to actually manage. Because what you're trying to do is manage the life cycle of a policy. There's nothing worse than building these policies and then forgetting about them. And especially with GDPR as example, if for example, you say, okay, we don't need to worry about certain principles within a policy because of the conditions of the business, and we're not doing those things. If something changes in the business, we better go and pay attention to those policies, those principles that we skipped out and we justified, and you have to refresh those policies. So just all of those different management, it's not an easy task, and you need to be able to link everything together. All right, all yours, Paul.
Cool, thank you, Howard. Thanks, everybody. It's awesome to join you all today. And yeah, just please interrupt. I can't always see the chat, Howard, but I know you'll jump on it if something happens there. But interrupt as you at will as well. So just to context, as Howard was talking about, we've been on the project for some time now, since just the end of June. And you've probably seen this if you've joined some of the other webinars where we've positioned our data value driven management playbook, which describes the playbook of our approach to the project. And you can see, just for the highlight today, there's a PDP highlight there saying part of this process or part of this playbook, there is a plan and a play for PDP, and part of that is describing the policies and procedures, obviously. So just to position that. In yesterday's note to advertise today's session or webinar, we talked about if you're required to do this, build a policy, personal data protection policy. Where do you start if you're starting from a blank page? I know how it's done it before. The team has done it before, but in terms of this context on this project, they hadn't done it before, and it was literally a blank page. And so you start to hunt around for inputs into being able to develop the policies. And there's a few things just to, again, just bring context, like, for instance, the National Data Management Office supplied compliance structures per domain, and here's the example for personal data protection. They also issued some guidelines in terms of principles for certain of the domains, which are obviously also inputs into your policy build and your procedure build. And you obviously need to be aware of all of that. And the playbook, the DVD playbook, has almost like two prongs. There's this compliance side of it or leg of it, but there's also this business alignment side. And that's dear to our hearts, is that although we are putting together all the practice or the practices across domains, how are we delivering value as we move along that journey? And so business alignment is critical. Do we understand the mission, vision, et cetera, and the goals and objectives? And as we are building, are we ensuring that we're aligning with business all the time so we can provide that feedback to them? Now, I think it was last Thursday, there was we talked a little bit about SIPOC last Thursday, and it was just something that I wanted to repeat, because that's the result of my talking will be the work that we've done according to that. But it's especially important to bring, the question was, one of the polls questions was, do you have a framework within your organization or in your context? And I was surprised to see it was kind of 50-50, or there was a bit of a split. Yes, we do. No, we don't. And some of it was depending on the organization. And I suppose that would equal yes or no. Do they have or don't they? But what we've positioned, or what we've brought to the table, is a framework. I won't go into the nitty-gritty of the framework, because I hope the deliverables will start to speak for themselves. But just to show that using a framework to enable us or bring that capability to the table, or support the capability to deliver to business, deliver compliance, but also deliver to the business is important. All right.
So
part
Paul,
of the
maybe Paul, to go back. One of the important things about this framework and template is that we then introduce what we call a policy scorecard that will then ensure that all of these areas have been addressed within the policy document. And then also just to make a note that small little internal block now also shows you processes. So remember, policies and processes, there's a slight different level of detail. The policy just describes the what, and the procedure describes the how, but they fit into each other and they connect with each other. So can you see, for example, we've got links to standards, other standards. We've got links to technology. We've got links to related policies. This is all the type of stuff that goes into that framework, Crystalline, so that we can manage all these interactions, and then also roles and deliverables. So without a structure, without something like this, it's almost impossible to bring it into a database management system that allows you to understand the life cycle, understand what you may have changed. You need to bring it out, and you need to structure that information.
Yeah, and Howard, also I'd probably say it at the back end of the talk as well, but it's that rinse and repeat, that continuous improvement. If you don't have the structure, you just lose your way. And the benefit of having the data or structured in a format like that, updates are quite simple. You know exactly which area to target and go and update and fix and etc. So really helpful.
And I think maybe just to add, Paul, one of your important points that you brought in is we know that compliance and regulation should not be we should not be in pain every single year. We need to produce this on a repeatable basis. Yes. So next year we have to produce a whole lot of evidence, and the year after, we have to keep on producing it. And if we keep doing it manually, we'll probably die, and it will cost the organization too much money.
100%, and it's exactly that. It's a message that I keep bringing every time I speak to the stakeholders within the organization. Is please, we got to stop seeing like this today's talk about policy documents or documentation as some artifact that goes onto a shelf and gathers dust. It's a live document, and if you don't keep it alive, you know, you'd have to re-employ the team again in a year's time to get you compliant again, basically.
Right.
So,
right.
And that's the benefit of the dynamic approach that we've brought, I believe, to the table. Just again, part of the documentation to structure the it's a bit of a circular reference. You'll see it coming through just now, but the PDP game plan. So this is our game plan to deliver. So when you saw that first block in the DVD playbook, this is the plan. So we go through stages here of design, operationalize, business as usual, and assure. And you can see our submissions, the regulatory submissions, are coming through to support the process. But as I said, we've turned it not just from a regulatory focus, but also business focus. We're using these submissions to drive business value, and that's important to bring to the table. All right. Okay, so as we talked about, you know, bringing the framework to the table, describing the framework, and using a framework to get traction and to actually deliver all the work. Just put together a how-to SIPOC slide. So you'll see it coming through now in some of the artifacts that I'll show. Your SIPOC level 1 is describing your policy, and just high level there, you've got, and those of you that have a copy of the DMBOK, you'll be used to seeing these SIPOCs, the context diagram for every single knowledge area. We call them domains in this project. And that talks just high level around the scope of the exercise, the policy scope, your deliverables. And I've put that on top because, yes, we read left to right, but again, from a tactic within the project, we have kept the deliverable in mind at all times. When it comes to building the procedure, when it comes to our inputs, when it comes to all the suppliers, consumers, we've kept that deliverable in mind at the forefront. Even when it comes to communication and training over here, right, let me just go back, sorry. Right at the end, sort of in terms of the how to SIPOC, even when building a communication and training plan, we've kept deliverable in mind. What is that unique message that we need to bring when we're communicating that is unique to this particular deliverable within the context of that domain, within this big framework of the DVD playbook, and likewise the training plan as well. Okay, so you can see coming through is your policy level 1, procedures level 2, but more detail. You'll see artifacts for the game plan documentation. I like to you know, elaborate on that a little bit and say, you know, it's our how-to material. It's our training material. So when you're in a presentation, when you're explaining something to someone, when you want to know how to do something, or as I said, there's a training plan along the way here. There's content ready that is continuously being updated as you are improving within your policies and processes. You're updating your material to bring that through. And as Howard alluded to as well, you've got your SIPOC assurance where you scoring your policy. And I've also just added here, Howard, the compliance monitor. Yeah. We did say that, you know, there's two things here. We after compliance, number one, or not in particular order, but compliance as well as business value. So value is coming through a highly rated score for that policy. It's being used. We can see the evidence when we do our DMMAs, and obviously we're tracking our compliance with the regulator through our compliance monitor. Okay.
So Paul, maybe just to pause there. Paul, sorry to pause. I think we've omitted to explain what SIPOC stands for. I know we did it in last week's one. Why don't you just explain what do we mean by SIPOC?
Okay, sorry. Okay, SIPOC, it's an acronym, and it stands for suppliers, inputs, procedures, outputs, and consumers.
Yeah.
And so I'll in the next slide, I'll actually just show you where it all fits in, and you might recognize the picture. I gave you a hint just now when I hit the wrong button, but there we go. So how to SIPOC level 1, also known as a context diagram. What we've done is we've used Excel. There's some Excel naysayers that are not on the call, so I don't have to get any chirps, which is great. But I just try to show starting to apply the framework and bringing the framework alive by using the SIPOC. So let me run through that again. You've got over here, it's very small for you probably, but you've got your suppliers that provide your inputs. You have your activities, or your processes or procedures, the participants to those activities and procedures. Okay. The activity is also broken down by control, and you would know controls in the DMBOK is your plan, development, operationalize, control as well. Those are your activity phases, and we've used the controls to break that down here in the project context. And your outputs, your deliverables, and who are the consumers of those deliverables. The SIPOC is great as well because, again, like I said, it's that high-level context of what we're doing. So at the top here, you see your definition or your background. You've got your purpose or your goals, objectives coming through in the gray block there. And right at the bottom, we bring elements like change, your awareness, communication, training, technologies and techniques. If you have those, you bring those in there, and your metrics, because again, everything should be measured. And so maybe just to pause, any questions, you can drop it on the chat, but that's your high level, your policy that we built. And we built that for every single domain across the for the project. And I think there's 15 of them. All right.
So Paul, maybe just a pause there. One of the things, if you go back and maybe if you use PowerPoint, that's almost a magnifying glass, and then let's focus in on the SIPOC. Okay. I was quite interested in showing people some of the changes we brought to the DMBOK. I'm sure there are a few of you that have been on the training and know the DMBOK context diagram. Paul, are you able to just focus on that?
Let me just find where's this?
So on your presenter view, then there's that magnifying glass.
And
then you magnify just that one area.
Gotcha.
Okay, move it over and give me magnification there. Okay, fantastic. So there are a couple of important points here. One is, if you know the DMBOK, they've got those also the deliverables, but what they don't have is the activities and the inputs that are required to create a deliverable. So one of the things we know and we spoke about when you do a data management maturity assessment, you've got to look at, show me the evidence that you are actually doing the work that you claim to be doing and the level that you're at. And of course, the easiest place to find evidence is at an existing deliverable or a submission. It's very hard to find evidence of a process unless they're data driven and they're keeping it all collected. Typically, they can say, here's a data model. And then we can do basically, where are the principles and processes and procedures for creating a data model? So can you see what we've done here is, for example, data dictionary, the PII catalog, the personal data storage, all of these things are then created by those tasks, and these are our inputs. So we now have the different inputs that are proposed for that to create those deliverables. So that's something that we missed in the DMBOK, but we, as Paul was saying, start with your deliverable and then move backwards in terms of what processes are going to create those deliverables. And then when I have a process or a procedure, what inputs do I need? Who is going to do it? And who's dependent on the output? For us, I just wanted to ask, is that making sense in terms of what do we mean by SIPOC? Right. Are there any questions in terms of, and I'm just hoping that when you do this type of thing, yes, you've got lots of other details like process numbers, we can remove that to give more clarity, but I'm hoping that this visualization is a whole lot easier than Word when you just, and we've done a Word document as well. So for example, to be compliant with the organizational standards, you'll have a Word document that represents this, but we're hoping to show you that this context diagram format is very helpful to read a policy document. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Yeah, Paul, your comments?
No. Just maybe to emphasize that traceability, how from that deliverable requires that activity and that input, and that's again that's where I think when we go into the DM for certification and we look at the DMBOK, and we hear it sometimes through the training feedback, that's a little bit of a lift in frustration, but yes, cool. How do I do what I do now? How do I get this out? So that's what we try to bring in, which has been really helpful for us as well to deliver.
And just to say that you had a compliance monitor, maybe on the previous slide, if you go back a step.
Let's go back one, yeah.
Okay, so if you look there, that compliance monitor, we are actually using the data management maturity assessment to do our compliance monitoring. Okay, yes. So the way we see it is that if you're not at a level 3, then you're non-compliant. Okay, so it's a very helpful way where we're getting really good at repeating the DMMA all the time. Where are we? What level are we at? Are we ready to submit? Are we compliant? Now, this needs to be checked. All these things, do we have every single deliverable? Do we have a principle for it? Do we have policies that create it? And do we have procedures? So all of these things have to be linked together. And then, of course, as you say, how do we communicate a data strategy? How do we communicate for a DMMA? How do we communicate our policies, as example? Yeah. Because we now have to get them used. We have to get everyone adhering to them. What's the communication on training to get those principles and policies operational within the business?
100%. Thanks, Howard. All right, so just, okay, next. So here we have our SIPOC level 2, and you've seen the context diagram, you've seen how everything fits together on one page. We've brought the traceability, we've enhanced that view. But here we go down to another level where we actually bring in steps of a procedure by deliverable. Remember that comment, we keep the deliverable in mind, and we now build out the procedure that's going to support in the delivery of that piece of work. And you can see there's attention being played to the inputs, and this one is quite generic across all the steps, but you could go down to a detail that the inputs for that step is different to the next one in some of the situations. And you've got your inputs, your customer, your participants in terms of responsible and accountable, your RACI coming through there, the suppliers standards that you're going to stick to if there are any, technique and technologies, your data breach play in this case, or one of the plays in the playbook, or some other input there, and what are your triggers and proactive controls. So you really go down to a great detail in terms of building that framework.
So Paul, maybe just to show them the detail, if you wouldn't mind just using that magnifying glass just to show the detail of those columns. Yeah. Okay. Over to the other side.
Oh, there. Okay, cool.
Yeah. That's where we go.
Oh, is it a bit small? Okay, cool.
Yeah. No, it's very small. Okay, so yeah, there you can see people that the level of detail down to the process step is even as important. So now we're jumping from policy, which is what do we need to do, to a procedure in terms of how we need to do it. And now we start introducing techniques and technologies and triggers and when does it happen, who does it, and then the RACI diagram. So maybe just a pause there. Are there any questions in terms of going to that next level of detail? I'm hoping you're seeing that the same framework that was used to generate our policy is used to generate the procedure. So this is the recipe that you need to follow and continue to follow to ensure that you've got consistency across all of the definitions, all your policies, and that's sort of almost the integrity that you bring to data governance is when you have this level of consistency.
Howard, if I may, just also want to jump while after this, let's jump to this Excel here quickly. This is another level of control that we've introduced in terms of some project feedback and all of that, but we've actually gone down in terms of what Howard was saying, the maturity levels. We've actually gone and scored the maturity level of each, if you want to call it, dimension of the framework. And if I jump back to the slide again.
Sorry, Paul, maybe just give us some more volume on that. So if you just show on Excel, so just increase the volume. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, sorry. So there we got, yeah, there you can see your domains, or we'll call them knowledge areas, your policy framework that you're using across the top, sorry, up to related policies. And it's a great guide in terms of your progress. Are we getting the work out? How far are we? Are we tracking according to project timeline, budget, blah, blah, blah. But probably more importantly, is definition scored? And is definition at a level 3, which means it's defined? If it's at a level 2, it needs some work. It needs to be enhanced. It needs to be reviewed. It needs to have some stakeholder engagement, whatever, so that you get to the place. Do you need input from the regulator? Do you need whatever? We need it. If that's the score that we're attaining for is a 3, all of these can be scored by dimension, which is great. And you can see in that example I gave you in the Excel, I must go check what happened while all the suppliers have gone. But in terms of that, your roles is not your roles are not complete if there are blanks in the supplier. So that hasn't been defined yet. So you need to go back and fix that, find out what's going on there, and update your policy. And it's just a bottom-up way to really ensure we reach that maturity level of a 3 and we remain at that compliant level. Again, regulation and driving business value really hard. And you've got just some calcs, current maturity, target maturity, how far you are. And then we even went ahead, by project phase, and we've elaborated that even to the documentation. So as Howard mentioned just now, part of the organizational constructs they require a Word template, and we're not arguing with that. We said, fine, we're bringing it together, and it's sitting at a 90% because it's my piece of work that I have to finish. Is a RACI. I've got to build a RACI across all domains, one view RACI for this piece of work that the lady's done here, so we can get that to 100%. Our game plan documents, that's what I'm busy presenting from. So those are in progress and being built, and on and on and on. So you can allocate people, etc., etc. So and this Excel is really our control sheet, and you can see across the bottom all the different domains each have its own SIPOC level 1, level 2, and we've even gone ahead and built a SIPOC for communication and training. So in our efforts to deliver the training plans and communication plans, what are the inputs required? And this is, and again, I think Howard was party to this with me, that came up that, geez, what do we need from the freedom of information specialist so that we can develop our communication and training plan and have those deliverables in place at all times. So I think I didn't zoom again. Sorry, there we go. But you can get, I think you get the idea. Yeah. All right. Cool. Next, I just brought in the data operations SIPOC. There it is. It's really small. Let me zoom in for you, and you can see, I think in context of what Howard was talking about today, is the recovery.
Retention, it's a data retention. So
is somewhere there. Retention period. A lot of things. So that's coming through strongly in data operations. That's where they positioned it in for this project, and a little bit more. I just elaborated that a little bit in terms of the game plan documents now. So when you're presenting and teaching and showing off, you can talk the procedure, Howard, being a data operations specialist, probably going to tackle me a bit here on some of my steps, but you represent it nicely in a game plan document, in a PowerPoint presentation, and as I said right up front, this brings content for your presentations, your meetings, your and your training content as well. Okay, so there's just an example there. It's another example of the game plan document, and here is an example of the Word document that we put together. I just blanked out some of the names, but this is now again another level of complying to the organization in what they require in terms of a structure for a policy. So all of this work built up to being able to summarize it and put it into a policy document like this, which is great, and it all connects up into a deliverable in terms of policies, P3T, basically. You've got your level 1 coming through, you've got your level 2, your procedural steps for across all deliverables. Your level 1 is then input into your Word document that they've asked for. Your procedural steps are your inputs into your submissions, if that is a requirement in any of your work and your projects. And then, of course, as I keep talking about, your training material, presentation material, reference material, in terms of your plays, your context slides, your filler slides, all of that coming through there. Following that, we've also, we've got a catalog, and we log in all our policies. Once they're all signed off, we will get them dated. We'll put in follow-up dates, and connect them to the related policies as well. So we've got a catalog in play, as well as how it talked about just now, your scorecard. So we've got, and you can see again, the framework that we've used across this whole piece of work. It's being scored according to that framework, which I think is it might be an obvious thing, but I've seen before where a scorecard is not equal to the framework. And I've sometimes looked at a policy document and thought, now, okay, cool, I've got to score this thing from a data governance point of view, but how do I do that? Where do I go? What do I look at first? And so when we're looking at even a Word document, is it in the structure, and can we apply the scoring and basically ensure this defined maturity level 3? Okay.
So Paul, maybe if you can just dial into that scorecard just to show people what that scorecard's doing. So yeah, we got this idea from the data modeling scorecard. So can you see here, these are the different components of the policy. We have a subsection, and then we have a score. Now these scores will influence the effort in terms of what needs to be described within those policies. I'm hoping you can see that. And so that's how we would be able to rate all the different people creating these policies, and Paul can have a review on each policy to ensure that it's been done.
100%. Thanks, Howard. Good. And then just my next slide is just an example of a compliance monitor. It's an example, the one we're using on the project, but it's in Power BI and embedded in Teams. And this is across all domains, but we're watching the monitor. Are we tracking towards compliance? How far are we? And there's other slides that we've built other graphs and images which help us by priority phase, in scope, etc. And so we use all of that to monitor the compliance. So that's important too. From there, I spoke about our communication plan. So there's a framework that we've put together, and by deliverable, you can see the deliverable coming in there. Deliverable is the data breach plan. We've got the reference numbers, so we can always type back in the database. What is the play? So what do we need to do here for this deliverable? And we've got our steps. We've put together, as I said, the SIPOC, which we've put together a communication plan formula and a training plan formula that we are thrashing through all the deliverables, and then being able to tick the boxes of what needs to be done in terms of your communication plan, and the second one being your training plan. For each deliverable, we're doing that as well. So quite important piece there. And right up front, I talked about the ability to bring continuous improvement to the table. It's a very important step. One of the change elements in projects is convincing people that not only is your data strategy, your policy documents, everything should be seen as a dynamic document or set of documentation, and we should apply an improvement lifecycle, continuous improvement lifecycle to all of this, so that we continuously reviewing. And I know that's dear to Howard's heart as well, that, like I said, if we're going through the procedures and we at a level 3, we all agree we're at a level 3, the next step is optimization, right? So let's look at that, and are we ready to automate this thing? Are we ready at the place where we can actually give it over to an app builder and say, go, run with it and automate this? And with the goal in mind, business value and compliance in mind at all times. That's the end of my slides, Howard.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks very much.
To go, and I hope I've done enough.
Yeah. Are there any questions for Paul before we go back to the retention policy? Would anyone like to ask any questions about how it was done? No questions. Sure. Andrew, yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry, Paul, just a quick question. How closely aligned the stuff that you were doing, how closely was it aligned to the DMBOK? Or did you find that there were quite a few places that you had to, especially from a governance perspective, that what you had to do was not all that closely aligned to the BOK? So I'm just trying to get a sort of feel based on this project that you've been working on is, was it relatively textbook, or did the DMBOK just provide a guideline and you had to do your own thing?
Okay, so yeah, so part of right up front, I said, what are your, you got to gather some input so you can complete or color in this blank page. And yes, from a project context point of view, there were some inputs in terms of some guiding principles, some definition for a few of the domains. But part of that guiding principle actually mentions and states that the DMBOK is the reference, data management reference that's applicable and is standard. And therefore, I applied the DMBOK, the thinking in the DMBOK to all this work. So where there were gaps, I used the DMBOK. I compared what was provided to us to the DMBOK as well. I know Howard has also done that, and you probably see it coming through in some of the frameworks that he's going to bring up now. But although the NDMO has given us a framework, the DMBOK was just as important to us in bringing the delivery together.
So Andrew, if you could see what's on the presentation now, can you see what we've done is actually map the NDMO regulation policy to the DMBOK, sort of those different areas. So can you see, for example, we have data value realization, which is a fantastic new domain that was introduced that talks about delivering value, delivering data products and pricing of the data products. There's an open data domain, which is also really exciting in terms of forcing government, and in some cases, I'm actually training at one of the banks at the moment. They are now also being held accountable to deliver these specifications. So even banks, in some cases, I know there's debate as to whether they should be or not. I feel that it's a fantastic opportunity. There's freedom of information. So can you see it's close to the DMBOK, but not exactly the same?
See, that's a great help.
Okay, fantastic.
Awesome. Anyone
Alrighty.
else? Please reach out anytime. I see your question there, Christelaine. I'll speak to you and get that to you. And anybody else, you got my contact or our contact, just drop me a line or ask for other information. It's fine. Happy to share. Cool.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much. All right. So let's talk a little bit about data retention and disposal. That's sort of in line with data privacy. So I'm sure you all agree that the only way to deal with continuous growth within your database systems is to have a data retention and disposal policy, and that's why it's been there for a long time. It's part of data operations and storage, but we now have to complement with data privacy. So if a data subject requests to be removed, then we have to, the event that's triggered is from data privacy, and we move on further on. So the core elements that we spoke about, and there's the reference to the SIPOC, activity planning and design on the policy, the role and team definitions, communication, the policy lifecycle management, and then continual improvement. Now, we also refer to this as knowledge management. Okay, so if we're going to go into managed and optimized, we have to constantly improve these processes and make sure that everyone knows where to go, how to go, what to do. They need to all know how to conduct these procedures and processes. And the big test is to say, can we bring on someone from outside the organization or a person new within this area? And how quickly can they get in and start to follow the processes as defined by P3T in our knowledge management area? Now, one of the things I keep on saying is that if, for example, we are going to allow us to apply RPA, or robotic process automation, in doing a quality assessment or doing a privacy data breach process, okay? So if we can't instruct humans to do it, all right, so if there's all just a whole lot of, well, we don't really know how we are doing it, then it's going to be very hard to go to a RPA type of solution for this. And we know with big data and stuff like that, we can't afford now to keep on doing this manually. We have to look at using machines to improve our performance. So the better you do this, the more control it is, the more in policy framework, the more chance you're going to be able to bring in artificial intelligence or digital decision. Okay. All right, so let's talk about activity planning and design. Those are the sort of who, when, where. This is at almost at a policy level. The how gets you your procedure, and then the how many gets you your metrics and timeframes and assurance. So this is the how many is going to validate and ensure that you're doing the work that you need to do. So who's responsible? Who needs to be notified? You know, that racy scenario. What triggers a change to our data retention? What's the frequency of activity? How often do these procedures need to be performed? Where is it happening? So when you do data retention and disposal, you need to talk about which systems, which storage, what's your retention definition, your life cycle, and then what's most important is the disposal evidence. I need to be able to justify that I have removed that data. So, for example, if we get triggered by a request from a data subject, we want to be able to go through this all and then demonstrate to them that we have disposed of all of the data that is related to them. Okay. Otherwise, it's just, please trust us and believe that we've done all of this work. Okay, then we go into the process of data's disposal. What I like to do is, first of all, we do from the system, from the application into the data warehouse. We then can archive it, and we can use different techniques of archiving in terms of things like aggregation or de-identification. We will then archive it, and then at a certain period of time, we can then, depending on the cycles that we have, we then dispose the data. And there's always this level of validation that all the data, all the assets that are under control are adhering to the retention cycles. And then we have the appropriate measurements that we need to adhere to. Okay. So here's just the life cycle of a policy. This is core to that database development. The policy is under development. We stage this as a level 2. When it's approved, it goes to a level 3 when it's implemented. And then we have maintenance on it, we have the monitor, and we have the continuous review. So each time you finish building a data product, you'll come back with a retro to review how well we did on our procedures and how well we performed. Okay, so we're now 6 o'clock, and just maybe take a break here and pause. Any questions, any comments from anybody?
No, so far, thanks, guys. I think it gives us a lot of structure, you know, on how to go about the process. You know, if you have these key points that you can focus on and go through, you know, if you look at your you know who and when,
Yes.
it gives you exactly sort of your tick boxes that you need to have in place to implement, and I think that's key for me. That's very informative. Thanks.
And I think it's Johannes. Is that correct?
That's correct, Johan. Yeah.
Yeah, Johan. He has an interesting statistic. Within the project we're working on, there's 191 specifications. There's 14 domains, 191 specifications, which almost describe the amount of detail that you have to go at your policy level. But can anyone have a guess in terms of the number of procedures that drives into? Okay, so and we remember we have a procedure per deliverable, so we've got to create a procedure. Can anyone guess or just have who would like to have a guess in terms of Imran? 700. Yes, I think you've been on the course. 709 was the correct one. So it scales up, and if you don't have this process that you're talking about, delivering 709 procedures is a killer. Right, you just can't keep all of that stuff together. How do you know where you are, what's happening, where are you with this, and what's operational, if you're not being data driven about your policies and procedures?
Yeah, that's quite key with the project I'm on now. You know, there's nothing at the moment. There's no structure. You know, so you know that to start is you know it's quite, it becomes quite a daunting picture to look at.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. Yeah, I was actually talking to MTN earlier on, and they were saying, sure, now they've asked us to do all these to get us to a level 3 of being defined. And there's this sort of panic in terms of saying, okay, how long is it going to take? What is it going to mean to do all this stuff? And it's no easy feat. And it's also not something that business see immediate value to. Especially except if you can explain how better we can be at at executing. You now have to be able to scope this and control these deliverables.
Yeah, it's just everything coming together is quite daunting.
Yeah, agreed. And especially, for example, with us, we were actually held to we had to do it. It wasn't a time and material. But for us to deliver on this project, we actually had a fixed price. And that's not easy either when you can start running on these things. Thanks. Any other questions, guys? Any last comments from yourself, Paul?
No, just to probably repeat, if we didn't have this, it would have been blood, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just so helpful, yeah, to keep track. Shucks.
And then I think what over and above that, Paul, was then just bringing in this communication plan and training. That's something that we haven't seen anybody do. We've seen people build principles and policies, and I hadn't done it. But now people are saying, well, we have to train on the processes. How are you going to train? And where is that documentation? So, you know, when you start doing it, you realize that this work can be done and benefit all sorts of areas. Fantastic. Guys, thank you very much. If there are no questions, really appreciate it. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for joining and presenting.
My pleasure. It's been
Thanks,
great.
guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Imran. Thank you.